a wound that never healed. The Air India Flight 182 tragedy. The year was 1985. The world watched in horror as news broke of a tragedy that unfolded in the skies above the Atlantic Ocean. Air India Flight 182, a Boeing 747 jumbo jet en route from Montreal to London, had vanished from radar screens. The wreckage, scattered across the cold waters off the coast of Ireland, told a chilling tale of terrorism. A bomb, detonated in the plane's cargo hold, had claimed the lives of all 329 passengers and crew members on board, making it the deadliest act of aviation terrorism at the time. The world mourned, but for the families of the victims, the pain was just beginning. This was no random act of violence. The bombing of Air India Flight 182 was a calculated attack orchestrated by Sikh separatists fueled by anger and resentment towards the Indian government. Their target was not just a plane, but a symbol of India itself. The attack sent shockwaves through the Indian community worldwide and left a deep scar on the national psyche. The bombing exposed the vulnerability of air travel and raised serious questions about security measures in place. The aftermath of the bombing was marked by grief, anger, and a thirst for justice. Families of the victims, many of whom lost multiple loved ones, struggled to come to terms with the enormity of their loss. The investigation into the bombing was complex and fraught with challenges, spanning multiple countries and uncovering a web of conspiracy. The quest for justice would be a long and arduous one, marked by delays, setbacks, and ultimately a sense of incomplete resolution. The bombing of Air India Flight 182 remains a dark chapter in aviation history, a stark reminder of the human cost of hatred and intolerance. The tragedy forced the world to confront the growing threat of terrorism and the urgent need for international cooperation to combat it. The legacy of Flight 182 lives on, not just in the memories of those lost, but in the lessons learned and the ongoing efforts to make air travel safer for everyone. The day the sky fell, a nation mourns. June 23, 1985, dawned like any other day. At Montreal's Mirabel International Airport, passengers boarded Air India Flight 182, their thoughts on their destinations and loved ones awaiting their arrival. Among them were families returning from vacations, students heading back to university, and young professionals embarking on new adventures. The flight, christened Emperor Kanishka, carried a tapestry of lives, dreams, and aspirations, representing the rich diversity of Canada, India, the United Kingdom, and beyond. At 8:14 a.m., the Boeing 747 lifted off into the morning sky, its departure seemingly routine. High above the Atlantic Ocean, however, a timer ticked away, counting down to an unimaginable horror. A bomb, concealed within a suitcase in the cargo hold, was set to detonate. At 31,000 feet, the device exploded, tearing the aircraft apart in a fiery inferno. The once majestic Emperor Kanishka was now nothing more than fragments of metal raining down into the unforgiving sea. News of the disaster spread like wildfire, leaving a trail of shock and disbelief in its wake. Families huddled around radios and television sets, their faces etched with worry as they clung to hope for survivors. That hope soon dwindled into despair as the grim reality set in. There were no survivors. The world mourned the loss of 329 innocent lives, their futures extinguished in an instant. The bombing of Air India Flight 182 was not just a tragedy for the families involved, it was an assault on humanity itself. Seeds of discord, Sikh separatism, and the path to violence. To understand the motives behind the bombing of Air India Flight 182, one must delve into the turbulent waters of Sikh separatism and its roots in the Indian state of Punjab. During the 1980s, a movement for an independent Sikh state Khalistan, gained momentum, fueled by perceptions of discrimination and marginalization within India. At the forefront of this movement were groups advocating for an armed struggle, their rhetoric growing increasingly militant. In June 1984, tensions reached a boiling point when the Indian army stormed the Golden Temple in Amritsar, the holiest shrine in Sikhism. Operation Blue Star, as it was known, aimed to flush out armed militants who had occupied the temple complex. The operation, though successful in its military objective, resulted in significant casualties and deeply outraged many Sikhs worldwide. The Golden Temple, a place of immense religious significance, lay damaged, and the wounds of that event ran deep.
The storming of the Golden Temple was a necessary and difficult decision. We had to restore order and protect the integrity of our nation.
The storming of the Golden Temple proved to be a turning point, pushing some Sikh groups further down the path of violence. The bombing of Air India Flight 182, just a year later, was a direct consequence of the simmering resentment and anger that followed Operation Blue Star. The perpetrators saw it as a strike against the Indian state, a way to inflict pain and terror on a nation they believed had wronged them. Their actions, however, were met with widespread condemnation, alienating many within the Sikh community itself. The bombing served as a tragic reminder that violence begets violence, leaving behind a legacy of pain, loss, and a cycle of retribution that continues to haunt the region. A bridge strained. The bombing's impact on India-Canada relations. The bombing of Air India Flight 182 cast a long shadow over relations between India and Canada, two nations bound by strong historical ties and a shared Commonwealth heritage. The attack, orchestrated by Sikh extremists based in Canada, strained diplomatic relations, exposing underlying tensions and testing the limits of bilateral cooperation. The incident highlighted the complexities of dealing with diaspora communities and the challenges of balancing freedom of expression with the need to combat extremism. The Indian government and many in India felt let down by Canada's response to the bombing. The perceived lack of urgency in the investigation, the delays in bringing the perpetrators to justice, and the acquittals of key suspects in 2005 fueled resentment and mistrust. The fact that the bombing was planned and executed on Canadian soil, despite warnings from intelligence agencies about the growing threat of Sikh extremism, raised serious questions about Canada's ability to prevent such attacks and hold those responsible accountable. The Air India bombing became a defining moment in India-Canada relations, a wound that refused to heal. It underscored the need for greater communication, cooperation, and understanding between the two countries, particularly on issues related to security, intelligence sharing, and extradition. The tragedy served as a stark reminder that the fight against terrorism requires a global effort, transcending national borders and political differences. Section 5. Security breached. A catalogue of errors. The investigation into the bombing of Air India Flight 182 exposed a series of security lapses and intelligence failures that allowed the perpetrators to slip through the cracks. The Canadian government, despite receiving information about the growing threat of Sikh extremism and specific warnings about potential attacks on Air India flights, failed to connect the dots and take adequate preventative measures. This lack of action had tragic consequences. One of the most glaring security failures was at Narita International Airport in Japan, where the bomb-laden suitcase was transferred from another Air India flight, Air India Flight 301, to Flight 182. The suitcase, despite exceeding the allowed weight limit and raising suspicions among baggage handlers, was not subjected to proper screening. The failure to thoroughly inspect the baggage allowed the bomb to continue its journey, ultimately leading to the destruction of Flight 182 and the loss of all on board. The investigation also revealed a lack of coordination and communication between different intelligence agencies within Canada. Information about the activities of Sikh extremist groups, Their plans to acquire explosives and their threats against Air India was not effectively shared or acted upon. This lack of inter-agency cooperation hindered efforts to disrupt the plot and prevent the bombing. The Air India tragedy exposed the vulnerabilities of a fragmented intelligence apparatus, highlighting the urgent need for improved communication, information sharing, and a more coordinated approach to counter-terrorism. Section 6. The Wheels of Justice grind slowly a long and winding road. The pursuit of justice for the victims of Air India Flight 182 was a long and arduous journey, marked by legal hurdles, investigative challenges, and a profound sense of frustration for the families who lost loved ones. The investigation, spanning multiple countries and involving a complex web of evidence, took years to yield any concrete results. The trial of the main suspects did not begin until 2003, nearly 2 decades after the bombing, and the outcome left many feeling that justice had been denied. Inderjit Singh Rayat, a Canadian citizen who had pleaded guilty to manslaughter in connection with the bombing, became the only person to be convicted in Canada for their role in the attack. Rayat, who had purchased the batteries and a radio used to conceal the bomb, was sentenced to 15 years in prison. While his conviction provided a small measure of accountability, it did little to appease the families who yearned for the masterminds behind the bombing to be held responsible for their actions. The 2 main suspects in the bombing, Ripudaman Singh Malik and Ajaib Singh Bagri, were acquitted in 2005 due to lack of evidence. The judge, in delivering his verdict, acknowledged that the bombing was a terrorist act, but stated that the prosecution had failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Malik and Bagri were responsible. The acquittals were met with outrage and disbelief by the victims' families, who had hoped for a different outcome. The lack of a conviction for the masterminds behind the attack remains a source of anger and frustration, a painful reminder that justice, in this case, was elusive. Section 7. Echoes of Loss: The Victims and Their Families' Unending Ordeal. In the wake of the Air India Flight 182 bombing, the world mourned the loss of 329 innocent lives. The victims, hailing from different countries, backgrounds, and walks of life, were united in their untimely demise, their stories forever intertwined by this senseless act of terror. Their families, left behind to grapple with the unimaginable, faced a future forever altered by grief and loss. The impact of the bombing on the victims' families was profound and enduring. Parents lost children, spouses lost partners, and children grew up without parents. The emotional toll was immeasurable. Many families struggled to cope with their grief, their lives shattered by the sudden and violent loss of loved ones. The pain was compounded by the slow and often frustrating pursuit of justice, as families navigated the legal system and fought for accountability. The families of the Air India victims displayed remarkable resilience and determination in their quest for justice and closure. They formed support groups, organized rallies, and lobbied governments, demanding a thorough investigation, accountability for those responsible, and recognition of the suffering they had endured. Their unwavering pursuit of justice, despite the many obstacles they faced, was a testament to the enduring power of love and the importance of remembering and honoring those who were lost. Section 8. Lessons Learned: The Bombing's Legacy on Aviation Security. The bombing of Air India Flight 182 served as a tragic wake-up call for the aviation industry, exposing vulnerabilities in security protocols and highlighting the need for enhanced measures to prevent similar attacks. The tragedy forced airports and airlines worldwide to reassess their security procedures, leading to significant changes that continue to shape the way we travel today. One of the most significant changes was the introduction of more stringent baggage screening procedures. The use of X-ray machines and explosive detection systems became standard practice at airports globally. These enhanced screening measures aimed to prevent explosives and other prohibited items from being loaded onto aircraft, making it more difficult for terrorists to carry out similar attacks. The bombing also led to improvements in intelligence sharing and cooperation between countries. The attack highlighted the need for a more coordinated approach to counterterrorism, with intelligence agencies working together to share information, track potential threats, and disrupt terrorist plots. The tragedy underscored the fact that terrorism is a global threat that requires a global response. Section 9. A call for unity. International cooperation in the face of terror. The bombing of Air India Flight 182 served as a stark reminder that terrorism knows no borders and that international cooperation is essential to combat this global threat. The investigation into the bombing involved collaboration between law enforcement and intelligence agencies from multiple countries, highlighting the need for shared intelligence, coordinated efforts, and a united front against terrorism. The attack underscored the importance of extradition treaties and agreements between countries to ensure that those responsible for terrorist acts, regardless of where they are apprehended, face justice. The long and arduous process of extraditing suspects in the Air India bombing case highlighted the challenges of navigating different legal systems and the need for greater cooperation between nations in bringing terrorists to justice. The bombing of Air India Flight 182 was a tragedy that transcended national boundaries, affecting citizens from multiple countries. The response to this act of terror required a coordinated international effort, not only to investigate the bombing and bring the perpetrators to justice, but also to address the root causes of terrorism, such as extremism, intolerance, and political grievances. Section 10. The unfinished conversation, remembering. Air India Flight 182. The bombing of Air India Flight 182 remains a dark chapter in aviation history, a stark reminder of the human cost of hatred and the enduring impact of terrorism. The tragedy forced the world to confront the growing threat of extremism and the urgent need for international cooperation to combat it. Decades later, the legacy of Flight 182 lives on, not just in the memories of those lost, but in the ongoing efforts to make air travel safer and to build a more just and peaceful world. The families of the victims, their lives forever altered by this senseless act, continue to seek closure and healing. Their resilience and determination in the face of unimaginable loss serve as an inspiration. Their stories remind us of the human toll of terrorism and the importance of remembering and honoring those who were lost. The bombing of Air India Flight 182 also compels us to engage in an ongoing conversation about security, justice, and reconciliation. It is a conversation that transcends national boundaries and political ideologies, calling for a collective effort to address the root causes of terrorism and to build a world where such tragedies are never repeated. The memory of Flight 182 serves as a poignant reminder that the pursuit of peace and justice is a continuous journey, one that demands our unwavering commitment and collective action.